Alright, good evening. So this is going to be a very long video because this is a topic that has become very dear to my heart. So one of the things that I like to do sometimes, if I know a video is going to be very long, I just listen to it more like it's a podcast. So if you can kind of treat this more like it's a podcast, because it is going to be a very long video, then that's probably going to be the best thing. Or like a little documentary. Sometimes I just shoot things off the cuff, but because there's so much information on this topic, which by the way is Debunking Hospice. So that's the topic. And because there's so much information on it that I have to say, I'm going to be reading. And there are 4 pages of information. So first I'm going to read my essay. And then second, I'm going to do another video where I can show you some free resources. Then I'm going to put these videos together into one. So if this is a topic that's interesting to you, take a walk and turn this on, do the dishes, do whatever while you're listening. Or if you just want to sit and watch me too, that's fine. But I won't really be looking at the camera because I got a lot to say and I don't want to miss anything. Alright, so I wrote this on Saturday, August 9th, 2025. The main topic is Debunking Hospice. The subtitle is Living Until You Die. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Jennifer Engel. I have stage 4 breast cancer, where it has metastasized to the bones, specifically within my sternum and a lot of the left side, and I do have some nodules in my lungs. I've been on hospice for 8 months now, and I would like to share my story, which, if you have been following me, you probably know a lot about. But if you don't, hello, here's my story. I want to talk about how I went from waiting to die while I was on hospice until living until I die. The point of this talk will be to educate people on what I have learned that hospice is, but also to debunk what hospice is not. Now, here's my disclaimer. I am not a healthcare professional. I am a patient. So this talk comes from my own education and experiences with hospice. So a lot of times you will hear information from a nurse's point of view, but this is information from a patient's point of view. With that said, it is only one point of view. And as you know, there are probably millions of people on hospice, so take it for what that is. But one of the things that I have found is a lot of times this stuff tends to be a little bit more negative. This talk specifically is supposed to be a much more positive view on what hospice is. And so that's why I'm sharing my story. First of all, this topic came to me from my last nurse checkup visit, as well as from my deep gratitude for hospice and caregivers. So I have caregivers outside of hospice, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. When I first started this process, I thought I'd eventually end up in some type of nursing home facility because I thought that my needs were too complicated. But now that I've been in this process for 8 months, I'm falling in love with hospice and home care. So, let's get into it. What is hospice from a patient's point of understanding? When someone has a terminal illness, they have 2 choices, hospice and palliative care. Palliative care is when a patient wants to still seek and obtain treatment for their illness, yet They may also need some help managing symptoms that go along with that treatment. Hospice is when a patient no longer wants to obtain treatment for their illness, but does want help managing their symptoms of the illness progression, which is where I am. The purpose of both is to reduce suffering. And one of the things that I've come to deeply appreciate is that I cannot imagine going through what I'm going through, which is the cancer progressing and eventually dying, without the service of these healthcare professionals. I am doing as well as I am because of hospice and the other caregivers. One of the myths that I want to debunk about hospice is that it's scary and it's where you go to die. Now, on one hand, that is true. 2 doctors have to agree that in order to qualify for hospice, the doctors have to write down that they believe, oops, there goes one of my earbuds, my right one doesn't like to stay in. 2 doctors have to write down that they believe the patient only has 6 months to live or less. With that said, any healthcare professional I've talked to, even those doctors who write down that you have 6 months or less to live, will be the first ones to say that no one can really tell how long anyone has to live. There's just too many pieces in play. When I first started this process, I did believe in the 6 months. There are even charts that will tell you what the progression of a terminal illness, or more specifically, what a dying person will look like at 6 months, 3 months, a month, week, and hours before. And some of these things are very accurate. Now, I've been very open with my experiences, and I do weekly updates on social media. And at first, I used those charts to keep people updated on my progress, and to even give them where I thought I would be on those timelines, based upon those charts. Those words, "You have 6 months or less," and those charts put me in the mindset of just waiting to die. And I honestly believed I was going to pass away this summer. In fact, if I'm being honest, I wanted to. Not necessarily for me, I didn't have a death wish, but so that my son wouldn't have to deal with his grief when he started school, and to finally provide closure to this very ambiguous process that after a while did not follow mine or my family's expectations at all. During the middle of the past summer, I had a scare. I was in so much pain that the hospice said that I could go to the hospital. There I learned I have colitis on top of cancer, and there were discussions regarding a few med changes. Once I got on antibiotics to help with the colitis, my whole body, and especially my spirit and my mind, did a 180 turn. I went from wanting to die to living until death. Also, this story shows that just because you go into hospice, they aren't going to just let you die. Hospice does focus on wanting you, or the patient specifically, because hopefully you're not on hospice. They want the patient to have a good quality of life before they die. For example, I didn't know that if you want to travel and get out of the house, even if it's to a different state, they will hook you up with hospices that will be near where you want to travel. I have this goal, and I've had goals of wanting to get out of the house and go attend a concert. As you can see, I'm like hooked up to oxygen, and So what they're doing is they got me smaller oxygen tanks, so that if I can and I feel good to go to this concert, the doors are open. All right, so really, they try to help you have a good quality of life. So just because you're in hospice doesn't mean you have to be homebound. If there are things that you want to do, and I keep saying you, so sorry, I should say the patient. I'm an English teacher, I should know not to say you. But anyway, if there are things that the patient wants to do, they're going to try to help them meet their goals. I know in the past when people heard the term hospice, and even if they had to deal with it, it wasn't the same as it was today. From my very brief internet research, anything before the 1970s and the 1980s must have been a very scary and negative experience. It is where you went to die, and they tried their best to manage symptoms, but they may or may not have been successful. In November of 1983, hospice benefits became a Medicare benefit that provided palliative care as well as hospice support services to terminally ill patients and their families. Which is another point. Hospice isn't just for the patient. It is also a support system for the whole family. I get a nurse visit once to twice a week, but our family also gets a chaplain and a social worker who has helped us. You can hear my cat in the back. Sorry, she's being a little whatever. A social worker who has helped us navigate the FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, so that my husband can take time off work to be my caregiver, as well as provide support on how to get like handicap stickers, and then also how to get like grief resources for the family. Speaking of grief resources, hospice also provides a grief counselor for the family up to a year after the loved one's death. I think Google's answer to the question, has hospice changed over the years? And the answer actually came from soulistichospice.org, a 501c3 nonprofit organization, said it best. Hospice wasn't always the way it is today. These services have come a long way since their inception generations ago. As awareness for the end-of-life care options and the approaches for holistic health increases, so do advancements in hospice care. And that's what I've experienced, that hospice isn't a place where I'm going to die. It is where I'm living until death. Now, with that said, there are some things that hospice does and does not do that people should be aware of. What does hospice do? Well, it provides the services that I mentioned above. Nurse visits, a social worker, also a doctor. The nurse always talks to a doctor, okay? So a doctor, nurse visits, a social worker, a chaplain, and a counselor for grief support. I also forgot that they can also provide a health aid that can help with showering as well. The patient can pick and choose whatever services that they feel will help them and their family. When a nurse visits, it is mostly to look at your vitals and discuss your symptoms and symptom management, which often includes medications. I have said this time and time again, and I'm picking it up again, that if the patient can keep a notebook or any other system to understand their medications and how they were working, they should do it. And if they're not cognitively able to do that, then they really do need to find someone who can help them do that. And I've had talks with people who have had to have talks with loved ones who are kind of resistant, right, to having someone check on them. So my thing is, when people are in pain, they're going to be in their amygdala, they're going to be in their animal brain, and they might not be rational. And so sometimes, if you are going to be a caregiver, or you're someone who is helping someone get on the hospice process or whatever, and you're willing to, you might have to do it without their knowledge. You know, keep the notebook, do whatever, because they might not be able to do it themselves. But it is vital to have some sort of system, because it will help the nurse know what the patient needs before they need it, as well as have conversations how well the medications are or are not working, so that you can problem solve together with your team on what works best for the patient. A nurse might be able to help with some assistive things while they're there, but mostly they're there to check on vitals and symptoms and symptom management. So, what does hospice not provide? They do not provide full medical care. That's where the patient has to have options based on their circumstances. And there's a lot of things to think about. So here's a couple bullet points. Hospice is covered under Medicare. So if you are on Medicare, there are probably not as many worries financially to be able to provide the extra support. However, I am not an expert. So, well, okay, if you're on Medicare, you will qualify for hospice, but you will not qualify for like extra care, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So you'll be able to, I'll just kind of talk about that in a minute. So hospice is covered under Medicare. So if you don't have insurance, then there's a little bit less worry, if that makes sense, okay? And if you're 65 and older. So I'm not an expert. So you really, if the patient's going on hospice, talk to the experts, talk to the social worker, okay? They know it, I don't. If you are not on Medicare and you have a lot of financial resources, you can still get hospice services. And so I'm going to kind of talk about the most expensive to the least expensive options of things to think about. Okay, so hospice is covered under Medicare. But first, if you have insurance, they're going to probably go through your insurance, okay? And if you're 65 and older, you qualify for Medicare. But even with being on hospice, like I said, the extra caregiving services, because remember, the nurse is mostly there to check on your vitals and symptom management. Yes, they can help with some other things while they're there, but outside of those visiting times, you're going to need another caregiver. So here is the most expensive to the least expensive. Professional services. The one that they talked about for us was Bright Star, but I'm sure there are many others that I don't know about, where you can hire nurses to come into your home. This is very expensive. For example, they told me that in order for a nurse to come in and do a medical procedure that I need, it would cost $175 every time a nurse came in. And if you need that 7 days a week, for the rest of your life, well, you can kind of do the math. Also, the nurses may or may not be the same nurse depending on the facility and the service. Also, the facility that hires the nurses and connects you together gets more of the profit than the nurse does. Now, there might even be nurses that you can hire privately, but I don't know a lot about that, and I would assume that's extremely expensive. All right, so there's professional services, the most expensive. The next one is a nursing home, or I think they call them long-term facilities now. From my research, having your own room is very rare. So I keep saying you, and I'm sorry. Just put patient when I say you. I'll try to say patient. Having their own room is very rare. The patient would end up sharing a room with 1 to 2 other patients, depending upon the facility. Also, it's about the same cost as renting a hotel room every night, or every day. So we're talking $200 to $300 per day. Now again, that's if you have a lot of financial resources and you are not on Medicare. All right, now there are pros. And Medicare, I don't know. Again, you need to work with the social worker, and you would also need to work with the long-term care facility or nursing home very specifically. They would know all the financial stuff, okay? So I'm just giving you generals, but you'd always want to check in with the social worker and with whatever facility you're working on, because they know the exact numbers where I do not. And every service is different, so the numbers are going to change. Now the pros to being in a long-term care facility is that you have access to healthcare professionals and you get to interact with the other patients. And they often have activities that the residents can participate in. Now the down cost might be prolonged time where you may or may not have people visit. Also, when I was talking to one of my caregivers who worked in a facility, sometimes it can take a toll on your mental health because even if the patient is not significant decline, they're going to see other patients who are in a wide variety of decline. And just sometimes seeing those other patients and their conditions can also take a toll on their mental health. I do believe that long-term facilities, like I said, were covered by Medicare. But again, I talk to the facility and talk to the social worker. All right, so we have hiring nurses, we have long-term care facilities, and the next one is something like care.com or other websites like it. According to care.com, they help families find support from professional caregivers, not just for the home health care, but also with children, pets, household chores, etc. But let's talk really specifically about when it comes to home health care, medical support. Not all caregivers are professionals, meaning they are not certified or formally trained. Care.com states that they do require background checks before interacting with families, but they do not guarantee quality. Now, they do say that there are features where you can see if the caregiver was an RN, a CNA, or if they do possess some sort of formal training and qualifications. But again, then probably their cost is going to be a little bit higher, right? And like professional facilities, the website would obtain more of the cost of payment than the care professionals would actually receive for their pay. All right, so we talked about hiring a private nurse, we talked about long-term care facilities, and we talked about websites like care.com, but there are other ones that you could look at as well. And so now I'm going to talk about the fourth one, word of mouth and recommendation. I have discovered that there are a lot of caregivers who have jobs simply from word of mouth and recommendations. I am lucky enough to have found my caregivers that way. Some of them have had professional training and some haven't. But what I've found is that they are professional. And by having my own care plan and checklists in place and setting up my own environment for their success, they do a wonderful job. Now, I have done a YouTube video on how to set up your home environment to get ready for hospice. So I'll put that link. The links will be pretty much on YouTube. So I'll put that below if you want to see how to set up a home area for home hospice care to come in. Things to think about. I found that my caregivers are wonderful. They pick up my checklist, they follow it, they get the routine down. And when I was doing my own medical routine, it took me like 2 hours to do it. And by the time I trained my caregivers, we were down to 1 hour. We cut the time in half. In addition, I found they are way more affordable than any of the options that I've talked about, and they get 100% of the profits. I just sell them their paycheck. All right, so we've talked about hiring a nurse. We've talked about long-term care facilities. We've talked about websites like care.com, and we've talked about word of mouth and recommendation. The last one, which probably is the most popular, and sometimes you need to combine these things, right? At least someone in your home will become your full-time caregiver. So now we're going to be talking about family and friends. There are people in your life who are willing to be full-time caregivers. I obviously have my husband as my caretaker when the hired caretakers and the nurse are not at my home. But with that said, one person cannot do it alone. Make sure that if someone volunteers to be your caretaker, they have support too. I'm lucky. I also have a roommate, and she does some little chores like taking care of the cat box and doing dishes and things to help support as well. And for example, my husband and I decided to also use social media to ask for help when we need other things, like meals or someone to sit with me so that he can do yard work or just get away for a while. All right, so those are kind of the 5 options. So hospice covers all those things I talked about: the doctor, the nurse, the chaplain. Most of your services will probably be coming from the nurse. The nurse will visit, it depends. If you're doing well, once a week. If you are like kind of in the middle, like me right now, I get twice a week. And if you're on significant decline, they might even come 4 or 5 times a week. So it depends where you are in that process, where the patient is in that process. Outside of those nurses' visits and the home health aide, you will need other caretakers. And that's where we talked about the 5. The nurses, the long-term care facility, the care.com, word of mouth, and family and friends is what we're on next. Now, there are some things to think about when it comes to hospice and caregivers. So now we're kind of talking about not necessarily the services of hospice. All right, going on to hospice or even palliative care. Oh, I say it's a win. Go on sooner rather than later. If you still want to fight and seek treatment, go on to palliative care. If you're just done because the treatment is worse than the disease, please, 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 I'm begging you, go on hospice sooner rather than later, because there is so much to think about when someone is dying. For example, you're going to need a power of attorney to determine your health care. That's where the social worker on hospice can help. So some of this hospice can help and cover, like the social worker, and helping you get like a power of attorney. You're going to want to create some sort of will. Now, hospice does not cover that. You would either need a lawyer, or I'm not sure how legit some websites are, but that is something you should probably put in place. Also, you really, really need to understand your financial situation. That's where, if you're still working, really, again, hospice doesn't cover that. You would want to work with your HR, human resource department, if you're still working, or just start going through all of your documents of what finances you have available to you. So some of that is just you. Or if the person, the patient, is not cognitively able to do that, then that will fall upon a caretaker or someone else to do that for them. Whether that's a family, a friend, but make sure with finances it's someone you trust. Because, with all the identity theft and everything. Okay. Also, you should really create a care plan and a checklist. Because think about this. I'm a teacher, okay? Was a teacher, am a teacher. And if I was out of the classroom, I had to write a lesson plan of what needs to happen when I'm gone. Well, if you don't write how you want to be treated in a care plan and what you like and what your needs and wants are, someone else is going to decide that for you. Again, I say you, the patient, not necessarily you. And so you really want to write that down so that if you're unable to, and I'm still going to say you, just say patient, okay, in your head. You really want somebody to treat you the way you want to be treated. So if you have it written down, if you become, not able to communicate anymore or whatever, then somebody else already knows how to treat you because you've written it down like in a care plan, in a checklist. Now, I also do have some free resources from some of my websites. I have a blank care plan. What I haven't done is I haven't posted like maybe just like a general checklist. It can be as simple or as complicated as you want. I have a complicated one that has like all my insurance information and everything on it. And then I have a simple one that's just 1 or 2 pages, like, when I wake up in the morning, I want this. This is the kind of breakfast I like. These are the kind of routines I have. These are the things I need help with. So it can be as simple or complicated as you want, but you definitely want to write down a care plan. And if the patient is not able to do that, then someone who knows the patient really well should do that for them. And again, I kind of briefly show what my care plans look like on my YouTube video about how to set up your area for home hospice care. So again, maybe you might want to check that out. Also, here's the biggest one that I've heard. If you don't have a list of your accounts written out somewhere with their passwords, then people aren't going to be able to help close those accounts or pay your bills or do whatever. I heard a story one time of a woman. Her husband had passed very quickly, and he was in charge of everything. And she had to try to hire someone to bust into his laptop so that she could do what she needed to do to deal with his death. When you have everything prepared ahead of time, it doesn't necessarily make things easy, but it does make things easier. I want you to think it's not just for you, it's for the loved ones that you're leaving behind. They're already going to be emotionally grieving. They're going to be stressed sometimes from caregiving. So why make it even harder than what it will be for them? So don't just do these things for yourself, do it for them. All right, so we talked about that. Last page. All right, so I've kind of talked about how you should probably like create a care plan, how hospice covers some things, but they don't cover others. So again, hospice gives you that doctor, that nurse, the social worker, the chaplain, a home health aide, and they also give you a grief support, the family, a grief support counselor for up to a year. The purpose of the nurse is mostly to come in and check on your vitals and your medications and your supplies. I don't know if I've talked about that. What supplies you need. Almost all your supplies can get covered under hospice. And sometimes to help with managing symptoms. But outside those times that they're only there to visit, which could be, again, depending upon decline, 1 to 4 times a week. And a lot of times they're really only there, it depends. It could be 1 to 3 hours depending on the need. But if you think about it, that's only 1 to 3 hours. There's like 12 hours or so where people are awake, right? So all those other times, you're going to need another caregiving facility or option. And a lot of times it's going to be in combination, whether that's hiring the nurse, whether that's going into a long-term care facility, whether that's going onto a website to find caregivers, or a family member. And a lot of times I found what I have is a combination of 3. I have the hospice. I have hired some caregivers for a couple hours a day during the week. I have my husband, but then also I use social media for what I like to call temporary or visitor caregivers, so that my main caregiver, which is my husband, can take a break. You need to know your financial situation in order to make the best choice for you and your family. Also, it is okay to switch hospices even. So someone might recommend one hospice, but there are so many hospice services. So if you try one and you don't like it, you can switch to another one. Also, even if you're within that hospice, if there's a certain nurse that you just don't feel is really listening to you or whatever, you can request a different nurse. So you can switch if it's not a good fit for you. I was super lucky with my caregivers. They're all great. But I did have to ask for like a nurse switch. And hospice actually wants you to be happy and get what you need. So they really are willing to work with you. So in the end, my main point is that hospice is no longer where you go to die. It is set up to help you live your best life until you don't have any left. So now what I'm going to do is, if you want a copy of this essay, and I'll be honest, if you look, I have tons of red marks all over it. It is kind of like a rough draft. So just know that. My brand is raw and real. So I did post this on one of my websites already. What I'm going to do for the second part of the video is I'm going to show you 2 different websites where I posted 2 different resources. One of them is like a care plan. Another resource is what to do when a loved one dies. And then the third resource is this essay, but please know it is a rough draft. But the whole point is that I wasn't even going to post it anywhere, but there's so much information. So if you at least have the bullet points, it might help if you want it. And then last is the YouTube video about how things to consider when setting up for home hospice. I hope this video has helped debunk what hospice is and isn't, as well as the services of what hospice does and does not provide, as well as provide options and understanding for what you or the patient can do when you're thinking about hospice. Now, on to part 2. Part 2 of Debunking Hospice, and the whole point of this is to show you the free resources that you could get. Now, I haven't published this to YouTube yet, but these will be the links that I will put in the description below. So the first one is if you can go to highestpossibilitystates.com. There, I'm going to show you, I wrote a book if you're interested, but the free resources specifically regarding this video will be an example of a more complex care plan, as well as what to do when a loved one dies. So you're going to want to copy and paste or just click the link once I actually record this video and put it in there, and it's going to bring you to this website. So the first thing that you're going to see is I did write a book called Highest Possibility States. If you are interested, you can click the link. It's on Amazon. I'm not going to sit and read this whole thing, but basically what it's about is when I went through cancer, I had a lot of questions. And so how do you recover when you go through trauma? And I came up with 9 tools and habits that could help other people get through their own questions in life, and how to handle life's trials. So anyway, that's there. But for the purpose of this video, we really want to, and I also did do another book as well. Highest Possibility States was my first one. The other book that I wrote was called Heaven Under Construction. That is a poem for every day that I went through cancer back in 2014. Okay, but getting back to the free resources for this video, you'll just go to free resources. All right, down here is just some stuff that's related with the book. I've also posted stuff like if you have PTSD, what's maybe a trick or strategy you could use. But again, for this video, here is an example care plan. So you can just hit example, and it's going to go into your downloads. So you're going to want to open your downloads, and you're going to double click on the example care plan. This one is the more complex care plan. It talks about all of your emergency contacts. It is made up, obviously. Christopher Robin, Kangaroo, Winnie the Pooh. So none of these numbers work. They're just examples. And medical coverage, you're going to want to take pictures of your health card and maybe insert that there. And then just what does good health look to you, poor health? Now, you do not need to do this type of detailed care plan, but to me, this is really good. If there's a big major emergency, your loved ones can refer to this and help you navigate that process. The other thing that I did that made it a lot more easier is I have a note here, and I just created a daily checklist. So from like 8:30 to 10, what do my caretakers need to do? Around 10 in the morning, what do they need to do? I have to do an enema every day, so what do they need to do? During the day, what do they need to do? And then my nighttime routine. So you can make it super simple, like just creating a list as well. It doesn't have to be as complex as my care plan. But I do have both, and I think that they are very helpful. Alright, also on this one, if you scroll down, I have steps to take when a loved one dies. So being prepared as much as possible really, really helps. So there's two things here. There's a checklist, and that will go down into your downloads. So you're going to want to open that up as well. And so it just has all the different steps to take when a loved one passes away. The other thing that it has is a phone tree template. To be honest, I don't really have this one. At least I think it has a phone tree template. Hopefully it downloaded. Oh. Let's try this again. There we go. Now it's downloading. All right. So there's a phone tree template. So in the event of a loved one's passing, communication is vital. A phone tree provides an organized way to contact multiple people and institutions. So you actually want to have like two different people. You want to have the organizational and support person. That's probably going to be your main caregiver, the one who contacts hospice and 911 and other institutions. And so there's this one. But you're also going to want to have a contact person who's more in charge of like contacting family and friends. So that's another resource here as well. All right. Then the next one, I have two websites because I'm not very good at consolidating things. So anyway, there's this other website that has more essays on it. So I did an essay called Waiting to Die versus Living Until Death, and I did a YouTube video on that one. But specifically, we were talking about debunking hospice. So you would copy and you would paste, or you would click the link, and it will bring you to this website. You would go into, this one just kind of talks about me a little bit. Then you would go to free resources. All right. So this was another essay that I did, but this is the one that you want, Debunking Hospice. So if you want all of the things that I was talking about in the video in one space, you would just click that and it will open it up into a whole new window, I guess. Again, this is a very rough draft. I found a lot of errors in it, but I'm raw and I'm real. But the point is, you would actually have all of the different things that I talked about. So use it more like a checklist rather than analyzing it. So any editor is going to have a heart attack, any engineer. But I wasn't even going to post this. But there was just so much information that I thought it would be good to post it somewhere. And again, I'm on hospice, so whatever. Just know that there's a lot of errors grammatically in here, but the whole point is that you have access to the things that I talked about, like all your different options and everything. All right. And the very last one, again, I have not posted this on YouTube yet, but when I do, there are some, there's a video that I'm going to be posting on August 13th, 2025, called Things to Consider When Setting Up a Home Hospice Space. And then also there's just like a really wide variety of topics on my YouTube, because I used to use it to do more like spiritual and information things. And then also I did it to have a place for my family when I pass. to have a lot of access to just me. This is the first time in history where when somebody passes, they can go to my YouTube and still see me, and know all of my thoughts and my feelings and everything. So when I post things, what I would recommend is going to playlists. All right. I'm a teacher too, so it just kind of talks about a lot of things. I've also posted me reading children's stories so that if my children have children in the future, grandma can still read them a story even if I'm not here. And again, I did a lot of more like spiritual kind of stuff in the past. But if you scroll down, I also did 46 videos on death and dying, if that's something that you're interested in. A lot of them are just more my updates on how I was doing throughout the whole process. And then I did 36 videos on cancer. A lot of these videos are going to cross each other. And then I did, I also posted it on hospice. So there are videos specifically, if you're interested in those topics specifically, I would go to playlists and scroll down to see what you might be interested in. And then of course I talked about some of my other books and everything, like The Heaven Under Construction, The Highest Possibility States, and more spiritual type things. I hope that this has helped, and that these free resources will debunk what hospice is, what it's not, and give you a lot more information.